So as I think all of you know, my name is Kopcsandy, and I did my project on something that's very controversial but also very important to me. And I did it because I believe that it's very important. So I did mine on feminism and its relevance in the modern world. And before you learn why it's important, you have to learn what it is and why you should even care. Feminism is a movement sparked by an ideology that believes that all people should be treated equally, even if they have a different gender. And its turbulent history, often, the beginning of the history in America is often attributed to the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, where women first collectively demanded the right to vote from the U.S. government. They gained that right with the 19th Amendment, which prohibited the government from abridging the right to vote based on sex. However, this was 72 years after the convention, so many of the people at the convention were actually passed away before this happened. Over the next couple of years, women became a larger and larger part of the voter base, and by World War II, they were actually a very significant portion of the voter base because many of the men had to leave to fight in World War II. As we move into the 1960s and 70s, feminism moves into its second wave, as opposed to the first wave which started with the Seneca Falls Convention. And the second wave saw a new surge of popularity in the movement because of the concurrent civil rights movement, so there was a lot of humanistic momentum in America at that time. However, with this surge of popularity came a lot of tension within the movement because some feminists felt that heterosexual women were collaborating with the enemy, which would be men, by associating with them and loving them and having intercourse with them. But as the second wave rolled on into the 1990s, the third wave began, which began more inclusionary practices even of men. One of the most important parts of third wave feminism is that there is no one way to be a feminist, because feminists are encouraged to look at all of their life choices and look at their repercussions on society as a whole instead of just doing things just for you. And this relates to the fact that the personal is political, which is another mantra of the third wave movement. And it means that even things that seem very deeply personal to one person are also politically overdetermined. For example, the choice to have kids is a very personal decision, but you may find that it's influenced by other factors. For example, someone who may not want to have kids might be influenced by their religion or culture to have kids anyway, or someone who may want to have kids may not be able to because they can't financially support them. So many of you may recognize this image from the VMAs last year, where Beyonce proclaimed herself as a feminist, and it sparked a lot of controversy, but it really shows how far the movement has come in terms of popularity. And I have a sample from one of her songs to play for you. This is from her song Flawless. And this is actually a sample from a TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and that's titled "We Should All Be Feminists."
Equality of sexes.
So even with the growing popularity of the movement, there are still many reasons why someone wouldn't want to be publicly proclaimed as a feminist, and one is that in some places it's still very dangerous to be actively pro-women's rights. For example, in Afghanistan, the leader of the Women's Affairs Department was actually gunned down, and her predecessor was killed by explosive planted in her car. Another reason is because even if you're not at risk of persecution in your country, such as in the United States, You might be afraid that your friends will ostracize you because socially being a feminist still has a bad connotation. And this leads to this famous phrase, "I'm not a feminist, but," which would be used to precede your opinion that you don't want to be associated with the feminist movement. So for example, someone may believe that women should be paid equally for the same work that men do, but they don't want to seem like a feminist, so they would add that in the beginning. The last reason why someone might not identify as a feminist publicly is because they believe that we simply just don't need it anymore, because in many history classes, the only thing that's covered about feminism is the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and because that was so long ago, it gives the impression that feminism is something that's over and that's obsolete now, but in reality, many of the problems that exist in feminism that feminism aims to solve still exist today. And something that people don't know about feminism is that it actually aims to help people of all genders, including men. However, it does focus on the liberation of women because women have been subordinated a lot in history by men. And the first way that this has happened, that men have subordinated women, is through sexism, which is prejudice based on someone's sex. For example, in a 2012 study, 127 science professors were asked to evaluate fake applications that were identical besides the fact that they were given the name of a boy or a girl. And even though the applications were completely identical, the women were rated as less competent, less hireable, and less deserving of mentorship, and also given a lower starting salary. Another similar study by psychologist Janet Swim involved her taking 123 of similar studies to that in which people evaluated fictional applicants or writing, art, behavior, or biographies by fictional men and women. And even though everything was kept constant except for the gender, the women were all consistently rated as less positive. The second way in which men have been seen as superior to women is through androcentrism. And andro is the Latin root meaning male. Androcentrism means prejudice based on gender expression, which would be being feminine or masculine. And this also leads to this very strange phenomenon in which dogs are automatically gendered as being male and cats are gendered as being female. And for example, dogs are referred to as man's best friend, but if you have a lot of cats, you're a crazy cat lady, which has a really negative connotation. And the third way is through subordination, which is the act of placing women in less important positions where they are more submissive and passive and they can't really rise up and achieve as much as men can. For example, U.S. women make up 90% of nurses as opposed to doctors, 92% of receptionists as opposed to managers, 86% of paralegals as opposed to lawyers, and 98% of dental hygienists as opposed to dentists. However, this current system also harms men in many ways because men are expected to always embrace masculinity and never femininity. You might be surprised to know that when cheerleading was first invented in the 1800s, it was a male-dominated sport, and it was seen as being hardly second to that of a quarterback, and it was a very valiant thing to be. And many men launched their political careers from being a cheerleader because it was seen as not a cute sideline to the main event, but actually a game of its own. However, as it began to be seen as a cute sideline, they let women into the cheerleading world, and it became like a feminine sport, so men had to leave because they didn't want to be seen as feminine. In addition, education is seen as increasingly feminine, and we can see that because in America, 62% of people with associate's degrees are women, and 57% of bachelor's degrees, and 63% of master's degrees are earned by women. Another way in which the system puts down men is through the glorification of hypermasculinity, which is the idea that exaggerated stereotypical male traits such as being overly aggressive or very physically strong or being sexually dominant is good. And we can see this through keeping track of who commits violent crime in our country. So for example, 86% of people who commit domestic abuse that causes injury are men, 87% of stalkers are men, 90% of murderers are men, and 97% of rapists are men, and 61 out of the past 62 mass murderers have been men. And this can stem from the fact that men are encouraged to never back down from a fight and to never show their emotions outwardly, because if they do, they might disappoint their role models who want them to be more masculine. And even though men naturally have the emotions of compassion and love and fear, these emotions are methodically driven out of men because they're not seen as masculine, they're seen as being weak. So as a result, many men have to bottle their feelings up and they don't know how to properly express them, which can lead to a lot of mental health issues later on in life. If a boy is seen, in a study by sociologist Emily Kane, she found that if young boys acted feminine rather than masculine, their parents would just explain it away, like saying, oh, he's just going through a weird phase right now, this is how he actually is. But when young girls embrace masculinity, such as doing sports, they would be very proud of her. This also, the glorification of hypermasculinity leads to a lot of very tangible negative effects for men, because every year in the US, 30,000 people are killed with gun violence, and 86% of those 30,000 are actually men. And it really doesn't help that we have real ads like these that ran right before the Newtown shootings that imply that you have to be violent and you have to use guns to be a man. And so when you think about all of this that men have to deal with, you wonder why they put up with it. And the theory goes that because society has taught us that men are naturally violent and men are naturally unemotional, this isn't seen as a problem that men face due to society, but because men do get the benefits of being superior to women in our society, that's seen as outweighing any possible disadvantages. So even though feminism does aim to help men, the main focus is women and liberating women. And the first struggle that I'm going to go through that women face disproportionately than men is violence. The first type of violence that I'm going to address is mass violence. And some of you may remember Elliot Rodger, who in last May shot a bunch of women at the University of California in Santa Barbara. He wrote this in his manifesto on why he wanted to commit murder, and he killed 6 women, injured 13, and then shot himself. In addition, he wrote about how he felt that inferior men, such as black and Asian men, he was racist, were always getting white women, and he wasn't. So this links his racism back to the fact that he felt that he needed to sexually dominate women because of the hypermasculinity that was shoved onto him. So he felt that he had to make himself appear more masculine by killing because he couldn't have sex. In addition, another man who committed mass violence against women was George Sodini in 2009, who was 48 years old. And he wrote in his journal that teenage girls are having more sex than he's ever had in his life, and he was very angry about it, so he shot up an LA fitness class. There are many more examples where this came from, such as Daryl Rice, who killed 2 women while camping, and he claimed that it was, quote, they were lesbian whores, so they deserved to die. And in addition, 2 years later, in 1998, Andrew Johnson and Mitchell Golden went into their middle school with guns and shot their female teacher and 4 female students. And this gets even more shocking when you learn that Andrew Johnson and Mitchell Golden were middle schoolers themselves. They were about 12 years old when they committed mass murder. The second type of violence that I'm going to go into is sexual domestic violence as opposed to mass violence because it's much more personal to the individual woman. I'd like to ask all of the women in the room to raise their hand. Start to count. Okay, there are 12 women. So statistically, the CDC study on it was a National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey of 2010. They found that 1 in every 4 women experiences intimate partner violence. So statistically, 3 of the women out of the 12 in this room have experienced that or will experience that in their lives. In another study, they found that 1 of every 6 women in the United States experiences completed or attempted sexual assault. So again, by that statistic, 2 of us will have experienced that or have already experienced that. In addition, 30% of female homicides are committed by a male partner, such as a boyfriend or a husband, while 3% of male homicides are committed by the wife or girlfriend. So this factor of 10% is too large to attribute to chance alone. And another source even says that in cases where law enforcement can determine the relationship between killer and victim, nearly half of all female homicides are committed by a male partner. I'd like to ask the audience a question. Who do you think, out of women, what age group do you think is the most likely to be sexually assaulted?
24.
Anyone else?
38.
Okay, so I heard late teens, and yeah, it's actually college-age women, and freshmen are most likely. College-age women are 4 times as likely to be assaulted sexually than anyone else, like in the United States. And this assault usually occurs in dorm rooms or at college parties or in dance clubs. And a shocking 56% of college males surveyed reported that they would rape a woman if they could get away with it. Apart from violence, women also have the implications of femininity pushed onto them. And femininity in the United States is often considered as being delicate, weak, but also nurturing and very virtuous. And while many women want to embrace the masculine persona, they can't because they're considered weak while masculinity is considered strong. And this also relates back to the fact that woman contains the word man, and this can show that men are considered as the generic humans while women are considered deviant from the norm. And women have a much more difficult time escaping their gender identity, while men can kind of cast it off and not really think about it as much. So as I said, women often want to take on a masculine persona in order to achieve their goals, but if they're not feminine enough for society, society will often punish them for it. For example, a woman who wants to appear ambitious and outspoken and intelligent must also appear feminine, and the way that she does this is through being beautiful. Men often don't have the same kind of pressure put on them. For example, in a magazine, if someone famous is given a magazine feature, if it's a man, he will often be given less touch-ups and less makeup, in addition to having a more powerful or business-like stance, while women, such as this woman, are given sexual and submissive poses regardless of their achievements. One example is Candace Parker, who is a basketball player who's on the cover of ESPN magazine. In her feature, instead of discussing her sports achievements, they decided to say that she is nice to animals and children. And I would like to just make you guys think about if you've ever read an article about a male athlete that was described as nice to animals and children. They also described her as wearing a C-cup bra, and also I don't know how that's relevant at all to her sports achievements, and I've never read an article about a male athlete commenting on his body. I mean, about like in a sexual way. So all of this makes women feel out of place in the business and achievement world, which is what the current system encourages because men are more desired because of the masculine traits of power and ambition. This keeps women in their societal role as non-achievers because, as I said before, women are often in supportive roles such as the mother, the nurse, the wife, or the teacher. This causes very tangible and negative effects on women in the workplace because white women earn 77% as much as white men do for the same work, and it only gets less and less as you consider women of color and even men of color compared to white men. For example, 87% of maids are women and 72% of janitors are men, and even though they do the same work, janitors make $3,000 more per year than maids do. The gap also increases as people get older. For example, between men and women ages 16 to 24, the gap is about 5%, but for men and women aged 45 to 54, the gap increases to about 25%. It also depends on whether you've been to college or not. So 1 year out of college working at a full-time job, the gap is 20%, but 10 years out of college working a full-time job, the gap increases to 31%. In addition, mothers and women in general are often expected to have a lot of family responsibilities like cooking and cleaning and taking care of the kids. So they often have to take on more flexible jobs that have like more flexible hours, but these jobs most often pay less than jobs with set hours. For example, 74% of mothers re-enter the workplace after having children, but only 40% are able to take full-time jobs and able to get full-time jobs. And mothers often, who actually re-enter the workplace, often feel like their work is underpaid, and they actually lose 18% of their earning power by leaving the workforce for 2 years. In a study by the American Journal of Sociology, it was found that the starting salary for a mother was about $11,000 less than the starting salary for someone who is not a mother. Also, in a study by Harvard in 2011, they compared the salaries of females with masters in business administration with men with the same degree. And And if the woman left the workplace for a year and a half, she came back, even with the same degree, she was earning 41% less than her male counterparts. So even if a mother is able to land a job with a reasonable salary, mothers are 50% less likely to be promoted at their jobs. And when they come back from maternity leave, they'll often find that they are not officially demoted, but effectively demoted, meaning that they are given less important cases and clients, and their work feels very supplemental and unimportant. This is illegal, but because of family responsibility discrimination laws, but many mothers don't know their rights, and even for mothers who do know their rights, they're afraid to rock the boat because they don't want to risk punishment because they already have a job and they feel lucky to have a job in the first place. In addition, 62% of private sector workers are discouraged or even prohibited from sharing their salaries with their coworkers, so it's hard to even tell if you're being discriminated against because if you can't know what your coworkers are getting for the same work. So, I've thrown a lot at you guys, but first I want to say that also in England, just like in most of Europe, mothers are offered a year of job protection after having their children and 39 weeks of paid leave for like maternity leave, and that paid leave can often be up to 90% of their normal salary compared to in the US where there is absolutely no laws guaranteeing paid maternity leave at all or any job protection. And mothers also have the right to request more flexible schedules, and part-time workers, which are often mothers, are paid in the same scale and given the same benefits as full-time workers. That's in England, not in America. So I've thrown a lot at you guys, like a lot. That's a lot of information to digest. But you may be wondering why I'm linking this all back to feminism, because it might seem kind of irrelevant. The reason that I'm linking it back is because feminism has the goal of helping all people, regardless of gender or race or sexuality, be treated equally and fairly. The goal of feminism is for me and my friends to be able to go to college without being afraid for my safety. The goal is to have my female friends and I get jobs and not worry about being paid less or paid unequally with my male counterparts. The goal is that I don't have to fear abuse from my male partner. The goal is that my male friends can express their feelings without feeling weak or emasculated. The goal is that I never have to hear another father take away his son's dolls because they're feminine. And honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg of feminism. Like, we haven't discussed very much, even though it seems like a lot of information, because there's so much more to discuss. Like, there's an entire ocean of problems that we need to solve. And what I'm asking you guys to do is to think critically about your actions. And so if your little brother starts crying, instead of telling him to suck it up and be a man, maybe ask him what's wrong and encourage him to express himself, because you never know what it will do in the future to him if you tell him to be a man right now. So consider why you might usually tell him to be a man instead of saying what's wrong, and try to think critically and change your attitude. And if you don't consider yourself to be a feminist, I really beg you to reconsider, because there are a lot of misconceptions about feminism when it really just aims to help all people, including men. And if you do decide that you are a feminist in the future, you'll be in really great company, and I'll be standing right beside you. Yes.
So you said that your presentation is just a data story, so if you had more time to delve into something more specific, what aspect of this would you choose?
I really only had enough space in my presentation and time to present to really talk about gender like on its own, but in reality you really should separate gender from like race or like class or ethnicity or like religion or anything else, because those three all really play a factor, play a role. Like women are disadvantaged, but women of color are even more disadvantaged, and poor women are even more disadvantaged, so you really can't separate those things. So I would have wanted to go more into different intersections like that.
Is there something you think our school could do better, the school in general, to ensure that there's equality? Like, is there something that's...
I don't really know if there's something our schools could specifically do, but I just wish that everyone would kind of take the time to learn and educate themselves and I guess try to care more about this kind of stuff. Because it's an individual effort, but it turns into something really huge when a lot of people learn.
how much do you feel mass media has influenced the divide between men and women?
So much. It influences the divide so much because, like, women and men are portrayed in such, like, static and, like, just solid ways on TV and in any media, and it really, like, it often influences stereotypes, like, in so many TV shows, like, you take, like, The Simpsons, you take George Lopez, you take South Park, you take, like, almost any TV show about a family you can think of, the dad is always some kind of weird, bumbling idiot, and the mom has to always come in and, like, raise the kids correctly. But that's really harmful to men and women, because it makes men look like they can't raise kids, and it makes women look like they're the only ones who can. Like, stuff like that, like, it's so subtle, but it really influences the way we perceive each other.
Do you think if more men were feminists, would it, like, push the thing?
I think it would, because, I mean, we don't have a very large percentage of women in power in the world. Like, only, like, 14 out of 193 countries have female presidents, so men are the people who usually have power in most countries. And so I feel like if men embrace feminism more and they learn more about how it can help them personally, like with the emotional stuff and with, like, not being forced to be masculine, I think it would help themselves and it would help everybody. And it would help the movement advance.